What's going on, gamers? So we have here a discussion with Porter Rock saying why he thinks Christopher Dring is damage controlling Xbox's failure. I just got to a part to where I think things start to get interesting. So let's get into this. Are we ready? Let me know what you guys think. Let's do it.
So you think Chris String is damage controlling Xbox's failure?
I ain't gonna say damage control. Well, yeah, I put it on the title. But there's like a little I don't how can I put this? And I'm gonna talk about this, so that way I could pull up his article and we could read it. But every time he mentions it, right, he always brings a perspective as the console industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which you could start out the combo, you could start out any combo with, okay, this big thing is happening. And then you'll be like, okay, now that
Is
we
this
got
audio
that
low?
away, now let's look at to the why. Why is this happening? Who's the contributor? What is the major root factor of this problem? And who are the players in the game, right? He always tries to align things on equal footing instead of saying, whatever. For example, he says, "Oh, PlayStation 5 is 2 million behind PlayStation 4," which is a true statement. But is that the same as Xbox literally being 15 million, 17 million behind when they were already on the downward trend the generation prior? Because the Xbox One was down from the 360, and now the Xbox Series X is even further down. So you see what I'm saying? So the two is nowhere near the same, but he gives this
Mm-hmm.
presentation like, no, they're both down. Which, if you just take that phrase at face value, okay, technically, yeah, they're both down, right?
Yeah.
But are they equal in urgency? Are they equal in things getting messed up, right? Now,
Ratio percentage? No, not even close. You could say that 90 some percent of that down is Xbox. Yes, of course. And Sony is the rest of that percentage. Yeah, I mean, that's just pretty obvious, but that's honestly, well, that would be hard to face. Like, why do you need to cope like that? There's no need.
with 2 million Sony addressed, part of the biggest contributor
Who cares?
of Sony being 2 million behind isn't really growth or what else.
And the reason why I say that is because I think the Xbox base has a while ago accepted the death, definitely now recently, of the hardware of the console, and now you're moving to what to whatever. So, yeah, if Christopher Dring was damage controlling, it is kind of pointless damage controlling. I would say so. Yeah.
However, number one was COVID. They couldn't launch as many consoles as they can, like the PlayStation 4 has. PlayStation 4 actually had the record for console launch. PlayStation 5 was already handicapped due to production costs, due to COVID
Sure.
production. So they were already at a handicap. And then number two, the cost. At one point, PlayStation within 5 years got down to $250. You could get a PlayStation 4 for $250. Right now, PlayStation 5 went up in price. So
Hmm.
to be 2 million behind PS4 at probably a more consistent $400 to $500 price, that's a huge feat.
Yeah, because we're talking about the math of $500 plus that rather than the math of 299. Even when they dropped it down, the Pro was 399, and they were canceling the whole generation. And even then, that's why I say when you really look at it, it is like a hack in a way and an automatic win at this point, and it's you're not really changing that. Same thing for Nintendo, hack and a win in a way. Um, so it makes you wonder like why would he even seem to damage control? Which we're gonna take a look at the post here eventually whenever he
Because
brings
that
it up.
normally wouldn't happen. There's no generation where 5 years into the gen, a $500 console is still selling amazingly well. That does not happen. It just doesn't exist. I mean, it's hard enough to sell a $500 console at the launch. You're telling me you're selling a $500 console 5 years later? So really, PlayStation 5, is at a good place. I also
True.
attribute this is PlayStation 4, and this is one thing Chris don't mention. This is why I have my issues. Is PlayStation 4 is still relevant. I think we all
Yeah.
have to accept that. Even though it's a last gen console, it's really not being treated as such. Marvel Rivals just got an update for PS4. Third parties are still making games for PS4. PS4 is as relevant this gen as it's ever been, which gives us a testament to how great PS4 is. PS4 is a great console, and it's showing. It has the longest legs of any console. The console came out launched in 2013. It's 2025, and is getting recent updates from major games. You see what I'm saying? So
To a
some
degree
people
now,
don't
yeah.
feel the need to go over to a PS5 because the PS4 is still great. It's not out, it's fake.
The funny thing is, what he's saying is the same reason why those people will be in the Switch 1 handheld mode still in Japan or playing on the Switch 1. And then, the Switch 2 is a huge upgrade for them. Because, like I said, the whole world is not like that where they need all those specs and graphics. That the majority of them do not care. Just like people that play on mobile, too. And then you look at a large community of people that play certain games, it's not huge demanding games. As we know, Roblox dominates the planet at the moment. And that has nothing to do with a high spec machine. So it's just understanding that kind of gives you a peer into things.
Phasing out more and more, obviously, right? But you see
Hmm.
how long it's taking to phase out, So I don't think
Yeah.
that's a problem, and I'm gonna make this point. I think one thing we have to accept is generational strategy is over. And I don't think Chris Dring accepted that. Because what he's doing is he's comparing this generation with last generation, which traditionally you would. That usually would be a metric, right? The transition over from one to another gen. I think that's over. I think generations in console is a done concept, right? We saw, I don't know if you're familiar with one of the business meetings, that Sony mentioned a couple of months ago. They now call it multi-generational strategy.
Yeah, and the thing going forward, definitely with all these people, is expanding out multi-platform profit and a luxury product profit, where it's like we don't even want to sell at a loss anymore. Let's be done with that. Nintendo's never sold at a loss, they've always played that game. Now they're trying to play that game now, and with these inflation excuses and tariff excuses, yeah, it's just not fun because now you're going to be luxury priced out. The entry to get in now is going to be expensive, but once you get in, you could probably be fine. But even then, yeah, I mean, we see it happening now, the elite market.
So put it this way: PlayStation 6 comes out, PlayStation 5 still in the game. They're not getting rid of it. And I don't
Of
think they're going to
course.
put in the energy of trying to force PlayStation 5 gamers to try to buy a PlayStation 6. I think they're just going to be like, release the games. When they're ready to move on, they'll move on. But in reality, when Sony releases a game for $70, what's the difference you buy that $70 games on a PS5 versus you buy it on a PS6? It doesn't matter to them.
Specs.
What does it matter if you buy Call of
But most people are always choosing the lower ends, right? As a majority or like the mid specs or whatever, because they want the experience, as I said before. It's the same thing why consoles were selling those back then and the way Nintendo so they want to get in and get those good experiences, and it's not necessarily about the highest settings. If it's running well and it's fine. Are they having fun and having a good time? Uh, if you can get that going, you're good.
Duty. Like right now, I'll give you a perfect example.
On the
Call of Duty
go.
still being made for the PS4. Sony gets a 30% cut. So what's the difference between a 30% cut on the PS4 version of Call of Duty, 30% cut on the PS5 version of Call of Duty? I think they realize that it's whatever. If you're subscribed to PSN on the PS4, you're paying $80 a year. If you subscribe to PSN on PS5, $80 a year. If you subscribe to PSN on a PlayStation 6, $80 a year. $80 is $80 a year. So I think generation is over with, and PS4 is part of the console generation today. I know we don't want to look at it that way, but I think from a business perspective, all those PS4 gamers are driving in billions for PlayStation. That's driving in billions for third party who decides to keep making games for them. It counts for them. They're not going to ignore it, be like, hey, even though we made billions on PlayStation 4, that's technically a last gen console, so we're going to ignore all that money. I don't think the business industry works that way no more. I think right now
Correct.
they're just going to keep supporting platforms that they can support up to the point where that platform cannot be supported anymore, which is more in line with PC. I think consoles are now becoming like PC in the sense there's no more generations.
That's what I was just saying. Now you got these different specs with the bases on there, but it's all combined together through different settings. And like I said, that kills the Series S grift and Switch 2 grift. It does. It slams it all down and exposes all those people. Um, that were kind of like trying to talk about that in a way. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, I wouldn't pay attention to none of that because when you really see how gaming was the most successful, it never had anything to do with, what type of GPU or CPU you had if you knew what you were doing. When did Nintendo ever lose to Sony in the handheld market? It was never about who had the most power. You know what I mean? That's never the case. Same thing with the Switch 1 and Switch 2. You know what I mean? and the PlayStation 5 was weaker than the Series S or X. That doesn't really matter. The only time Sony got that edge was with the PS4, but they did a really good job with that. And the PS3 was getting outsold when that came out because it was too expensive and that cell processor was ridiculous. It eventually caught up when the prices balanced, but you see what I mean? And the Wii outsold both of them, and the DS outsold everything, 154 million. So Nintendo had the biggest install base ever in gaming history, 255 million or 256 million install base, with 154 million of the DS and 102 million of the Wii. Insane. Never in history has that ever been done again. That was peak. You know what I mean? And like I said, it had nothing to do with having more power. It wasn't any of that. And I think people just forget that sometimes in Western society. Same thing with Roblox. Why is it dominating like that? It has nothing to do with power. Minecraft, nothing to do with power. League of Legends, nothing to do with power. Mario, none of that, right? All the games that played the most. Call of Duty has nothing to do with power, right? Not that that can't work for certain games. Of course it can, but the idea is that it's all about fun and having a good time and playing a really good video game. And sometimes people can get distracted with that and focus on too much details, and their budget is out of sync, and they forget about the important factors. So yeah, that's something that I thought that had to be mentioned.
If they could make the game on this lower set of consoles, they're gonna do it.
Yeah,
They're not gonna force technology to make consoles obsolete. Consoles will just be obsolete naturally on its own time based on what they're trying to do with the game.
yeah.
That's what I think. And I don't think Chris is thinking that way, right? I think he's trying to level set all the issues as equal, which is not really a good way to look at things because the main contributor to the console going down is particularly Xbox.
You know what? Let's pull it up then. Let's go to Dring's page. Here's this page right here. I think he's talking about this right here specifically. Yeah, here's the post right here. Whenever I cover the potential challenges in the console space and the numbers are mixed and the market is shifting, so it's muddled, the immediate response is this is just Xbox failing. Why don't you say that? Well, for starters, I'd say that, but it isn't all Xbox, he said. And this is what Porter Rock is responding to. However, your little console tribalism isn't really relevant to the discussion. He's a funny guy. Because from a publisher developer point of view, the situation is that consoles are declining or at least seeing a slower transition and pricing is going up, which may impact the buying abilities of existing players. This scenario is what's driving the push towards multi-platform releases, including from first-party studios and fewer console-first games. And this isn't just an Xbox problem. So he's trying to bundle the percentage that isn't and say that. But when you really talking about the drop off right here, the number of active PS5 and Series S consoles will be 14 million behind. And if this was like 13 million and Sony was like one, or this was 12 million and Sony was two, there is a major difference. This is the majority of the decline. They're the ones that are leaving out. So what? Everybody knows that. This is happening right in front of everybody. This is a crime to say. This is something like you're supposed to offend somebody because they can't handle a simple fact that's pretty obvious. I don't think so. Yeah, that's pretty obvious. And he made the statement about the PS5 still has the same price though. And it's still just only 2 million behind, but selling at a way more expensive price and canceling all those games. Yeah, it's a hack, man. So I wouldn't say that Sony is making the gaming industry decline, really. No, but did they mess up the chance to make it shine goldenly, like Nintendo's been doing? Yes, they messed that up big time and disappointed a lot of people from a first party perspective. So obviously that has to be stated. And we get the idea of what he means by this. So that's what this is about, just in case people were wondering.
They're the ones with the biggest problem because they have been on a downward trend for 2 generations back to back. That's where the source is.
Hmm.
I don't think the issue is with PlayStation, Nintendo, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going into a lot of topics long winded. But I think one of the biggest, and I noticed this in the Twitter, one of the biggest counter arguments is, well, okay, fine. If this is just Xbox, then how come the number of PlayStation gamers aren't going up in comparison to the amount of Xbox gamers going down, right? Once again, kind of like, okay, so if 30 million Xbox gamers left, where do they go? And then so in the chat, and I'll go deeper into that. I tell them just because a person didn't buy an Xbox doesn't mean it automatically translates into a new let's say PlayStation 5 sells. Because a good scenario is think of the people who owned an Xbox and a PlayStation 4. There's a lot, right? People
Hmm.
think that every Xbox owner is an individual owner. That is not true.
No.
Many of them are multi-platform owners. They have an Xbox and a PC. They have an Xbox and a PlayStation. They have an Xbox and a Switch. They have an Xbox, Switch, PlayStation, PC, any combination. Now in the new generation, they're like, wait a minute, I got a PS4 and Xbox One, but this gen, Xbox games are going to PlayStation. So you know what? I'm just gonna stick with PlayStation this gen. I don't really need to buy an Xbox. So they dropped the Xbox, but they stayed continued buying the PS5. Them dropping the Xbox doesn't mean okay, now I gotta buy another PS5 so I can own two. No, all they did was they just dropped the redundant product. PC game
True, that has been happening a lot. Definitely this generation more than ever. And I mean, I did that, right? But I'm on my PC with Xbox, so it doesn't matter.
gamers, they if any audience did that, it's the PC gamers. They definitely did that
Yeah,
more than anybody else. Because the PC gamers had Xboxes, because Xbox had exclusives that were not on PC. You couldn't play Halo 5 on PC. You couldn't play a lot of the games that Xbox had on PC. It just wasn't possible. So PC gamers who enjoyed Xbox games bought an Xbox.
yeah,
Once Microsoft said day and date on PC, Game Pass, all that stuff, PC gamers are like, so why do I need to buy an Xbox? I get everything on my PC. So they just simply dropped an Xbox. That doesn't necessarily mean they had to buy another PC or whatever. They were already on it. They just simply dropped the redundant product. So a lot of those issues is people dropped redundancy, which is a Microsoft issue. That doesn't necessarily mean it needs to
hmm,
translate to another device because they already had that device. They just dropped the redundancy. Does that make sense?
hmm, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. I was gonna make the argument that like if the 14 million less or just Xbox people not buying Xboxes, then what are they doing instead? But you answered that argument.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
And because
yeah,
remember, he's trying to treat every Xbox owner as a unique owner. That's no. That's that people got to stop aligning console with people.
he has a very good counter argument there because you're missing a lot of stats by not realizing we already have that, so it doesn't need to buy anything. I simply just like I took my Series X and swapped it for the Switch 2. Had a great deal around that time when they jacked up the price. And then I traded in my Switch One with that, and I got the Mario Kart bundle. I paid nothing. You know what I mean? And got myself a 256 gigabyte card too at Walmart. Really good deal. Added that in, got that for like $40. Crazy deal, you know. And still have my high-end gaming PC. My PlayStation 5 is still there, and life is good. And my Xbox is right here on my PC. I can just click it right up there and pull up the app.
We got to align the consoles with value, right? Because again, people bought Xboxes, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing they had. They also had PlayStations, they also had PCs, they had Nintendo Switches. What ended up happening is people saw no longer saw value in buying an Xbox because it became the redundant product,
Yeah.
right? That doesn't necessarily mean that value got replaced because that
Yeah. No, 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 no. You just moved a PC to it because it's something to face. Like it's like, dude, nobody's buying it. It's still 30,000.5, and that was back in August. With this stuff going up, dude, it's not going to sell. You know what I mean? We're gonna be getting more updated stuff, but it's like when you look at the Switch One outsells it. Yeah, I mean, for them to move anything after jacking up the price recently. What I see with that too is, like I said, them pushing people to go to the PC market.
user probably already had another console, another device. What they did was they just simply dropped the redundant product because it didn't have value, and what the value was exclusive games. All those games now are on another product which they already buy, so they just consolidated into just that one device or whatever. Does that make sense? So yeah. So a lot of
yeah,
people try to say if it dropped by 14 million, then there should be 14 million of something else. Like no, that's not necessarily true. It just means somebody dropped the Xbox because it's the least valuable product. And that's a problem for the industry. Microsoft, the problem in the industry is Microsoft has a product that no longer has value among a lot of people. That's a problem. And that's what's hurting the gaming industry or the console industry, right? So now it's really PlayStation, Nintendo to make up the value that Xbox has, and that's only for certain people, right? Because some people they already have PlayStation and Nintendo Switches, so
Hmm.
Nintendo and PlayStation are really fine. But Microsoft did, you know, make a product that was part of the console industry, but it just doesn't have as much value as it used to have, primarily because of lack of exclusive games.
Yeah, you mentioned the disadvantage of coronavirus, where
Yeah.
there was a shortage of PS5s.
So we get the idea of what Proto thinks about Christopher Dring damage controlling. He had some really good counterpoint arguments here. Let me know what you guys think. There's a lot of things definitely I'm going to agree with because it's like, yeah, that's pretty obvious, and we're not going to cope over here. As a gamer, I just always, face whatever as a gamer. In general, though, like I said, you still can enjoy Xbox for what it is, Game Pass, the future of cloud, expanding out to eventually get good. It's not there yet, so that's why I say even though that's a cool idea, but right now it's still kind of mid. And it's about what you can get from Game Pass mostly. Outside of that, which could be anywhere. So, yeah. Speaking of hardware and Christopher doing damage controlling, this is really unnecessary. So, all right, y'all. Let me know what you guys think. I had to check out this disagreement day, and get some stuff up for this. All right, y'all. Peace out. Have a great day. Later, ponies. Sit down. Gamers, stay being true.